Hey everyone, today I want to go over the NIDDAH laws. Shalom everybody, and welcome to Beit Tefillah. I've been asked quite often lately about the NIDDAH laws, so I thought I'd do a video today and go over those. But I want to give a warning that this video may not be suitable for children due to some of the subject matter, so I just want to give a heads up on that before I begin. So to get started, let's define NIDDAH. The word NIDDAH comes from Hebrew and it means separated or moved, and it generally refers to separation due to ritual, impurity, or being unclean. The word NIDDAH occurs 29 times in the Tanakh and most often refers to a few different forms of uncleanliness found in the book of Leviticus. The first time it's used in Tanakh, it's in this verse in Leviticus 12:2. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a woman has conceived and given birth to a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her monthly separation, or NIDDAH, she is unclean. The word NIDDAH is used 5 times in the book of Numbers, and all 5 times it's referring to ritual purification by the ashes of the red heifer. I'm not going to go into that subject about the ashes of the red heifer today. We'll save that for another video, but I just wanted to mention that fact up front. Today I want to focus on just the commands for NIDDAH. There's a lot of questions out there regarding these NIDDAH laws and how we are to interpret them or apply them in our lives today. And for some of these questions, the Torah doesn't always provide clear-cut answers. A couple of those questions might be, in a modern society with upholstered furniture that cannot be laundered, can a young woman have a pillow or a cover for it that she might use to keep her from coming in contact with furniture on which others might sit? That's a real good question. And another one is she allowed to work at her usual kitchen or household chores and serve food, etc.? That's another good question. But let's read these NIDDAH laws in the Torah. Leviticus 15:19-24. And when a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her flesh is blood, she has to be in her separation for 7 days. And whoever touches her is unclean until evening. And whatever she lies on during her separation is unclean. And whatever she sits on is unclean, and anyone who touches her bed has to wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And whoever touches any object that she sat on has to wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And if it is on the bed or in any object in which she sits, when he touches it, he is unclean until evening. And if a man lies with her at all, and her monthly flow is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days. And any bed he lies on is unclean. So notice that when the woman has the issue of blood, this is obviously talking about her time of the month, right? When she has this issue of blood, if they lie together, have sex, and then they find out that it's her time of the month and they accidentally get some of that blood on the man is also unclean for 7 days as well. We're going to talk about this a little more here in a few minutes, but let's also read what comes next in that same chapter, which is a slightly different situation in Leviticus 15:25. And when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than at the time of her monthly separation, or when she discharges beyond her usual time of monthly separation, all the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her monthly separation. She is unclean. So obviously this part here is talking about other issues pertaining to a flow of blood that may be an extension of or have nothing to do with possibly a woman's monthly cycle. Let's read Leviticus 15:26-28. Any bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge is to her as the bed of her monthly separation. And whatever she sits on is unclean, as the uncleanness of her monthly separation. And anyone who touches them is unclean, and shall wash his garments, and shall bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she is clean. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And now after reading all of that, let's take notice of this next passage from Leviticus 15, 29 to 31. And on the 8th day she takes for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and shall bring them to the priest, to the door of the tent of appointment. And the priest shall prepare the one as a sin offering, and the other as an ascending offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her before Yahweh for the discharge of her uncleanness. Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my dwelling place which is in their midst. So can we do any of that today without a temple and a valid priesthood? We can't, right? And earlier in that same chapter of Leviticus, we can read some similar laws pertaining to men in Leviticus 15, 2 to 13. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any man has a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is unclean. Now this could be talking about a pimple or a boil or some kind of infection or something. We're not getting to the semen part just yet, but we will be here in a minute. So let's finish hearing this out. And when we're listening to this, let's take notice of how Elohim is making sure that everything is kept separate and it's kept clean as to not spread infection. It's very detailed. Let's finish this. And this is his uncleanness in regard to his discharge. Whether his flesh runs with his discharge or his flesh is stopped up by his discharge, it is his uncleanness. Any bed becomes unclean in which he who has the discharge lies, and on any object on which he sits becomes unclean. And anyone who touches his bed has to wash his garments and shall bathe in water and be unclean until evening. And he who sits on any object on which he who has had the discharge sat has to wash all his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And he who touches the flesh of him who has a discharge has to wash his garments, bathe in water, and shall be unclean until evening. And when he who has a discharge spits on him who is clean, then he shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any saddle on which he who has a discharge rides becomes unclean, and whoever touches any of that which was under him is unclean until evening. And he who is carrying them up has to wash his garments, shall bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And anyone whom he who has had the discharge touches without rinsing his hands in water shall wash his garments and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And the earthen vessel which he who has a discharge touches has to be broken, just touches. And every wooden vessel has to be rinsed in water. And when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, shall wash his garments, shall bathe his flesh in running water, and be clean. So now let's jump ahead a few verses and read Leviticus 15, 16 to 18. When a man has an emission of semen, then he shall wash all his flesh in water, and be unclean until evening. And any garment and any leather on which there is semen shall also be washed with water, and be unclean until evening. Now, same for the women. We hear this command from Elohim regarding the men in Leviticus 15, 14 to 15. And on the 8th day he takes for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and shall come before Yahweh to the door of the tent of appointment, and shall give them to the priest. And the priest shall prepare them, one as a sin offering and the other as an ascending offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him before Yahweh because of his discharge. Well, like I asked a minute ago, can we do any of that today? Of course not. We don't have a temple today for Elohim that we could possibly defile. We don't have access to ashes of the red heifer, nor do we have a valid priesthood to perform duties in a temple either. But that does not mean that we are to disregard these commandments. Not at all. We are to keep ourselves from becoming unclean, just as Elohim instructed. Just as we're to refrain from eating unclean things like unclean meats, those things have not changed. Commands are still commands, and they're still for today. What has changed, as I already mentioned, is that there's no longer a temple that we would be in danger of defiling by any uncleanness that we may have. So we keep the commands of Elohim the very best we can, but because there's no temple today, the sacrifices and offerings have been suspended, along with the possibility of us defiling a temple that is no longer present. Let's hear the dangers again of violating the NIDDAH laws back in the day. From Leviticus 15:31. Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my dwelling place which is in their midst. So there you go. We need to remember that unclean animals were not accepted as sacrifices. They couldn't be brought into the tabernacle or temple. That would have been bad, as doing that would have defiled the dwelling place. Wouldn't want to be the one doing that. Let's hear a couple other examples of being unclean and approaching Elohim, starting with Exodus 19, 10 to 15. And Yahweh said to Moses, Go to the people and set them apart today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments and shall be prepared by the third day. For on the third day Yahweh shall come down upon Mount Sinai before the eyes of all the people. And you shall make a border for the people all around, saying, Take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall certainly be put to death. Not a hand is to touch it, but he shall certainly be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast. He shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, let them come near the mountain. And Moses came down from the mountain to the people and set the people apart, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, Be prepared by the third day. Do not come near a wife. Obviously, he's saying, avoid having relations with your wives, okay? Because you're going to be unclean, and you don't want to be unclean when you're coming near the presence of Elohim. Okay? So wash yourself, wash your garments, don't come near a wife. You don't want to be unclean when you're going to go meet Elohim. That would be bad. And Elohim said all this to protect the people. It was for their own good. Okay? Let's read Leviticus 22, 1-3. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons that they separate themselves from the set-apart offerings of the children of Israel, and they do not profane my set-apart name in what they set apart to me. I am Yahweh. Say to them, Any man of all your offspring throughout your generation who draws near the set-apart offerings which the children of Israel set apart to Yahweh, while he has uncleanness upon him, that being shall be cut off from before me. I am Yahweh. So Elohim commanded these things to protect the priesthood and the people. Same for the laws of NIDDAH that were put in place to protect the people. Because look what we just read there in Leviticus was about the priests, the sons of Aaron, not coming near the set-apart offerings. Wasn't talking about coming near Elohim, but the offerings that were set apart to him. That they would be cut off from their people. That's bad. Okay, so all this is put in place. Things that are set apart to Elohim. Elohim is so super set apart. So is his dwelling place, and so are the offerings that we cannot come before him or those in an unclean state. The Torah is very clear that sex during the time of NIDDAH was forbidden, as Elohim created the female body to cleanse itself and prepare the womb every month for the possibility of pregnancy. Let's read a couple of verses about some of that. Leviticus 15, 32-33. This is the Torah for one who has a discharge, and for him who emits semen and is unclean thereby, and for her who is sick in her monthly separation, and for one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for him who lies with an unclean woman. Okay. That was talking about ritual uncleanness. For one who lies with an unclean woman, that was by accident. It wasn't on purpose, as we'll see in these next two. Leviticus 18:19. Do not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness in her monthly separation of uncleanness. Uncovering her nakedness means to have sexual relations with her. Leviticus 20:18. And a man who lies with a woman during her sickness and uncovers her nakedness, he has laid bare her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from the midst of their people. So as we can clearly read in the book of Leviticus, it strictly forbids sexual intercourse during the time of a woman's NIDDAH cycle. Okay, so obviously couples need to refrain from that kind of activity until that time of NIDDAH or separation is complete. While the NIDDAH commandments are still required by Torah, in today's world there's actually not any consequences to becoming impure, as there's not a temple in Jerusalem that we can visit and put ourselves in danger if we are in an unclean state. Becoming unclean is not a sin. However, disregarding the laws of Torah, such as the laws of NIDDAH, is a sin. And we all know that there are consequences of sin, so even though some of this may not be crystal clear, and we still may have many questions, we must try to guard the Torah to the very best of our ability. Well, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please sub to our channel if you haven't done so yet, and give us a thumbs up. We'd sure appreciate it. A shout out and a shalom to all my brothers and sisters that are scattered worldwide in the dispersion. Everybody be blessed and have a wonderful day.